The dawn broke over Cedar Falls like a quiet promise, soft light filtering through the towering pines that lined Evergreen Avenue. It was the kind of morning that felt almost sacred, when the world holds its breath, awaiting the hum of life to fully awaken. In the heart of this stillness, 77-year-old Vivian Carter stepped out of her cottage, a gentle smile creasing her weathered cheeks. To the casual observer, it looked like any other early stroll, but anyone who knew Vivian understood that this daily ritual was a testament to her unbreakable spirit. She moved with deliberate confidence, each tap of her ivory-handled cane echoing against the worn flagstones like a metronome for her independence. Vivian wasn't born blind. She carried vision once, vibrant with color, until an aggressive bout of glaucoma claimed her sight over 2 decades ago. Yet she never let darkness define her. Instead, she learned to read the world by sound and scent, by memory and intuition. That morning, she inhaled deeply, letting the aroma of damp earth and pine needles fill her lungs, grounding her as she navigated the path with practiced ease. Neighbors would later say they felt safer knowing she was out there, her presence like a steadfast beacon proving that age or disability could never steal one's dignity. Every element of Vivian's route was etched into her muscle memory, from the soft creak of her front gate to the slight incline where the sidewalk cracked beneath an ancient oak. She knew the town's layout better than any map. She paused at the edge of Hawthorne Park, listening for the distant chirp of morning sparrows and the gentle rush of Maple Creek hidden beneath a wooden footbridge. That creek, coursing swiftly over smooth stones, served as a familiar soundtrack. Children's laughter and the bark of an eager golden retriever might mingle here by midday, but in these hushed hours, the park belonged solely to her. The cane itself was more than a tool. It was a keepsake. Its handle, carved from ivory and polished to a pale sheen, had belonged to her late husband, Arthur Carter, a World War II veteran who'd taught her to navigate life's storms with grace. Arthur's hands had shaped that cane in a woodshop he built himself, wood scraps from family projects repurposed into something lasting. Before cancer claimed him, he whispered, "Walk proud, Viv, walk proud, for both of us." And so she did. Day after day, the cane's rhythmic taps, a heartbeat honoring his memory and her own resilience. As she ventured deeper into the park, her senses tuned to the subtlest changes, the hum of a distant lawnmower, the rustle of squirrels raiding bird feeders, the soft echo of her footsteps on gravel. She could identify every landmark by signature alone. The metal bench warmed by the rising sun, the fallen pine cone nestling at her feet, even the distinctive creak of the east gate hinge that marked her halfway point. Passing under a canopy of golden maples, she lifted her chin, feeling the sun's gentle kiss on her skin, and allowed herself a moment of pure contentment. Yet even the most unshakable routines can harbor surprises. Vivian hadn't noticed the uniformed figure until she felt its gaze, sharp and insistent, settling into her back. She paused mid-step, hand resting lightly on the cane's handle, and waited. The world around her held its breath too. It wasn't the sound of the man's boots that caught her attention, but the undercurrent of something darker, a twinge of judgment in the air, as palpable as the morning chill. "Morning," came the clipped voice breaking the hush. Vivian recognized the tone. It wasn't concern, but authority wielded like a weapon. Her face remained serene, her posture unchanged. "Good morning," she replied evenly. The syllables floated on the breeze, polite yet inflexible. She could sense him sizing her up, as though her very existence in the park was an affront to some unwritten rule, but she held her ground. For Vivian Carter, yielding was never an option. He shifted closer. Vivian's fingers tightened on her cane, not in fear but in readiness. She sensed the man's impatience, his need to exert control over someone he presumed powerless. There was no malice in her, only a well-earned wariness. "Just be careful out here," he said, his words laced with an unmistakable edge. It wasn't a warning, it was a challenge. "I always am," she answered softly, then resumed her walk, each step deliberate, each tap of her cane declaring her refusal to be intimidated. Behind her, the stranger lingered, watching as she navigated toward her favorite bench beneath a sprawling oak. The bench, stained by countless seasons, sat as a silent witness to her resilience. Here, she would rest and absorb the day's first warmth before continuing on. But this morning, the space felt narrower, charged with a tension that hadn't belonged there before. The birds seemed to hush, the breeze to still, as if the park itself paused alongside Vivian, bracing for the moment when this quiet morning walk would be irrevocably altered. What she couldn't know was that this brief encounter, this undercurrent of hostility, would ignite a reckoning far larger than her solitary journey through Hawthorne Park. An act of cruelty carried out in broad daylight, born from prejudice and magnified by power, was about to collide with Vivian's unbreakable will and the fierce love of her only son. In the days to come, the same cane that had been her guide and companion would become a symbol of injustice, and eventually of the hard-won triumph that follows when courage confronts corruption head-on. So stay with us as we follow Vivian Carter's path from this serene morning into the eye of a storm she never invited, but is more than ready to weather. You won't believe how a simple walk in the park can transform into a fight that shakes an entire community to its core. Keep watching, because when true justice begins, it often starts with the softest, most unexpected footsteps. The moment Vivian stepped off that park bench, cradling the snapped remains of her cane, Cedar Falls itself felt tenuous. Like the very earth might give way under the weight of injustice. She navigated her front door by touch alone, her fingers brushing the familiar brass knob until it turned. Inside, her small living room lay silent, except for the distant hum of the refrigerator and the muted tick of a grandfather clock. She took a single faltering step before allowing her legs to buckle, settling onto her favorite armchair in a haze of disbelief. The ivory handle of her cane, once polished smooth by her late husband's hand, rested across her lap, a harsh reminder that brutality could be so casual, so unprovoked. She heard her cell phone buzz on the side table. She didn't want to look. She knew whose name glowed on the screen: Lieutenant Marcus Carter. He was her only child, 45 years old, and as steadfast as the sunrise. First in his academy class, now the trusted second in command of Cedar Falls Police Department's patrol division. He had inherited her calm strength, but she feared he would also inherit her battles. Still, she pressed her trembling fingers against the call button. "Mom," his voice crackled through the speaker, deep, steady, laced with concern. "I saw you missed a few calls this morning. Everything okay?" Vivian paused, gathering her composure. "Marcus," she whispered, voice tight as a fraying rope. "Something happened at the park." Silence crackled down the line. "Mom, what's wrong?" "It's my cane. They broke it." The words tumbled out in a ragged rush. "An officer snapped it like it was a twig." Marcus's breath caught. "Which park? Which officer?" "Maplewood Park," she said. "Near the north entrance. I'm fine, just tired." He didn't hesitate. "I'm on my way." The click of his boots against linoleum cut through her grief. 20 minutes later, Marcus pulled onto his mother's driveway, blue lights off, car off standing on his own 2 feet before her door. Vivian opened it a crack, eyes red-rimmed, clutching the scatter of broken cane pieces wrapped in a dish towel like a mother swaddling a hurt child. Marcus knelt, setting aside his cap and badge, gaze settling on the shattered handle. "It's okay, Mom," he said softly, voice measured. "Let me see." She handed him the ragged pieces, ivory handle detached from its shaft, wood fibers splintered. He turned it over in his hands, the silver plate. "To my strength, Viv," still gleaming faintly beneath the cracks. His jaw clenched, but his tone stayed calm. "You didn't deserve this," he said. "That man, do you know who he was?" Vivian closed her eyes. White uniform, nameplate said Knox, Patrol Division. "He said I shouldn't be out here alone." then told me people like me shouldn't wander without someone to watch over them, and when I answered him, he took the cane, snapped it. Marcus pressed his palm to her shoulder. I'm sorry you had to go through that. He rose, glancing at his watch. This isn't right. I'm calling it in right now. Inside the station, Detective Sarah Nguyen, Marcus's longtime partner, greeted him with a raised eyebrow. You look like hell, Carr, she began. Her eyes fell on the wrapped cane in his hand. She stiffened. What happened? Marcus exhaled. Vivian's cane was broken by one of our own, Officer Knox. I need to file a complaint. She blinked. Knox? Are you sure? He nodded. Got witnesses. A coffee vendor near the park said he saw it. I need all his patrol logs, camera footage from this morning, witness statements, even the audio from nearby security mics. I want everything. Sarah hesitated. You realize how this looks. Bringing an internal complaint against a patrol officer. It's bold. Justice is never convenient, Marcus said. And this is my mother. This has to be done. By noon, he was at Hawthorne's coffee cart, the small stand that lined the park entrance. The vendor, a soft-spoken college student named Derek, recognized Marcus immediately. Lieutenant Carter, what brings you here? Marcus flashed his badge. Derek, did you see anyone near Mrs. Carter this morning who didn't look like a jogger or a dog walker? Derek swallowed. Yeah, I did. That guy, he was too aggressive. I recorded it. Thought maybe it wasn't right to record an officer, but something about it felt wrong. He tapped out a video on his phone and handed it over. The footage was brief, just a few seconds of crisp audio and shaky frame, catching the motion of someone grabbing Vivian's cane and the sharp snap as it broke. Marcus watched the video once, exhaled, and said, Thank you, this is going to help a lot. Stay by your phone. Internal Affairs may need your statement. Derek nodded, eyes wide. I'm glad you're doing this. Feels right. Marcus moved on, stopping at the park's other entrances. He found Clara, a stay-at-home mom, taking her toddler for a stroll on the gravel path. Lieutenant Carter? I'm sorry. About your mother, I saw it. Her voice wavered. I didn't want to make waves, but I saw everything. He just snapped her cane like it was nothing. I'll testify. He collected her contact info, thanked her quietly, then walked back to his car. His phone buzzed. An email alert from the PD's records division. Knox's patrol logs, body-worn camera files, and all nearby security camera footage had been assembled into a folder for him within the hour. By mid-afternoon, Marcus sat at his computer in the precinct's internal affairs office, uploading the video, chewing through digital files, tagging timestamps. He created a clear timeline. 7:02 a.m., Vivian enters the park. 7:17 a.m., Officer Knox approaches. 7:18 a.m., confrontation. 7:19 a.m., cane snapped. Every byte of data, every witness statement, every log entry found its place in a meticulously organized case file. All the while, a low hum of departmental gossip trailed him. He'd overheard knocks on cruiser doors in the hallway, a few sideways glances in the briefing room, the quiet click of doors closing behind him when he entered. But he pushed on. Because blood is thicker than uniform loyalty, and his mother's dignity outweighed every whispered warning. Late afternoon brought a knock on his office door. Captain Elaine Rutledge, head of Patrol Division. She stepped in, brow furrowed. Marcus, I've heard rumors. Care to explain why you're filing IA complaints against one of our own? He looked up from his screen. Captain, I'm filing a complaint because an officer assaulted my mother, broke her cane, humiliated her in public. We can't allow that kind of conduct to go unchecked. She sighed, pinched the bridge of her nose. I get it. She's your mother, but protocol is protocol. There are channels. Investigations can drag on. Reputations get tarnished. For the right reasons, Marcus interrupted. If this isn't enough to warrant IA action, then what is? I'm not asking for special treatment, just for accountability. Apply the same standard you would if this had happened to anyone else." She stared at him, then exhaled. "You're right. I'll support the investigation. But you should be prepared. It won't be smooth sailing." He nodded. "Understood. But I'd rather face turbulence than let abuse hide in plain sight." That evening, as Marcus drove home, folder in hand, phone buzzing with new witness texts, he felt the weight of what lay ahead. Internal Affairs would open a formal probe. Officer Knox would be suspended pending review. Disciplinary hearings would follow. But beyond the paperwork, something deeper was shifting. A firewall of solidarity around his mother, and a message sent to every badge in Cedar Falls that cruelty, however casual, would not stand unchallenged. Pulling into his driveway just after dusk, Marcus braced himself for the long nights ahead. He carried more than evidence. He carried his mother's faith, a lifetime of her quiet courage, and the promise that he would walk with her every step of the way until broken dignity was fully restored. And that fight, he knew, would define more than just a single complaint. It would reverberate across the town like the metronome taps of Vivian's cane, steady, persistent, and impossible to ignore. You might think filing an internal affairs complaint would wrap everything up, but that's when the real battle began. By late afternoon, Captain Elaine Rutledge had signed off on suspending Officer Bradley Knox, pending a full IA review. But in Cedar Falls PD hallways, silence isn't peace. It's a warning siren. Lieutenant Marcus Carter felt it the moment he walked back to his office after the suspension order came through. The dispatch clerk, Officer Ramos, barely met his eyes when he greeted her. Senior Sergeant Holt, who'd always patted his shoulder in the mornings, now slipped past without the usual nod. Even at roll call, the room was noticeably colder. Officers who usually laughed at his jokes strained to keep their distance, shifting uncomfortably whenever he entered. Still, Marcus pressed on. He organized Knox's case file, body cam footage, patrol logs, Derek's video, Clara's statement, and delivered it personally to Internal Affairs. Investigator Mindy Greer gave him a curt thank you, her face unreadable. But the papers hadn't even hit her desk before rumors began to swirl. Carter was turncoat, rule breaker, mommy's boy. That evening, voicemail after voicemail glowed on his phone. Unmarked numbers. The mayor's chief of staff, city council members, anxious for details. At home, Vivian, no longer willing to sit in the dark, waited at the kitchen island, the broken cane laid out between them like evidence in a crime scene. "They're talking about you, Marcus," she said, voice steady but tinged with worry. "They'll try to push you out." He shook his head, exhaustion heavy in his bones. "I won't back down." Over the next 48 hours, the campaign of quiet intimidation ramped up. Someone slashed his tires at the precinct. No note, just 4 flat tires on his unmarked cruiser. Someone keyed his captain's name into the lobby elevator. His inbox overflowed with constructive feedback from colleagues who reminded him of how families stick together and how public disputes ruined careers. One afternoon, as he returned from a meeting with the city attorney, Marcus found a printed poster taped to the bulletin board, a crudely redrawn badge with his face in the center, underlined by the question, "Traitor?" He stared at it long enough for Sergeant Holt, reluctantly, walk up and peel it down. "Don't let them get to you," Holt muttered, voice low. Half the department's scared of what happened if they spoke up. That night, Marcus sat at his kitchen table, the folder of documents spread before him, illuminated by a single lamp. He rubbed his eyes, then looked at his mother. "They're trying to isolate me," he said. Vivian set a cup of chamomile tea beside him, the steam drifting like a tiny white flag of calm. "They'll run out of breath long before you do," she replied, eyes shining with quiet pride. 2 days later, Internal Affairs summoned him back for the first formal interview. He arrived in a plain charcoal suit, evidence in hand. But this room wasn't about attire, it was about power. Investigator Greer sat behind a sterile desk, flanked by 2 brass-shouldered officers from IA. "Lieutenant Carter," she began, voice clipped, "thank you for coming in. We'll review your complaint against Officer Knox now." As she asked questions, "When did you first learn of the incident? Did you consider alternative resolutions?" Marcus answered each with calm precision, referencing timestamps, witness names, and his own badge number. When she played Derek's shaky video on her laptop, showing Knox's harsh grab and the snap of ivory, the room fell silent save for that long, awful crack. He watched her face, saw the slight spasm behind her composure when the audio ended. "Is that your mother's cane?" she asked. "She says it was a family heirloom." He nodded. "A gift from my father." Probing followed. "Are you prepared for possible fallout within the department? What do you hope to achieve? Are you willing to see this through, regardless of personal cost?" He met each with honesty. "I'm prepared, accountability, yes." When the interview ended, Marcus exhaled. "Thank you," he said, standing. Greer's eyes held his for a moment. "We'll be in touch." Outside, the splendid autumn sun felt colder than ever. As he walked back to his car, a group of officers lingered by the patrol vehicles, low voices carrying. He passed them, shoulders squared, senses alert. One of them, Officer Diaz, someone he'd mentored, gave him a fleeting nod. Marcus returned the gesture. Allies were out there, even if hidden. That evening, a second wave of retaliation hit. The next-door neighbor called, "Your garden hoses have been cut again." His laptop at home flickered with a phishing email disguised as IA correspondence. "Click the link. Your complaint has been dismissed." He recognized the tactic from cybersecurity training: sow confusion, waste time, break resolve. But he threw the email straight into his digital shredder. As rain began to patter against the windows, Marcus gathered key documents into a waterproof envelope: witness statements, coffee vendor Derek's contact info, Clara's affidavit. He fixed a list of potential backup witnesses, park regulars, tacked it to his fridge. Then he sat beside Vivian at her kitchen table. "You've been through worse," he said gently, recalling her war-zone resilience, her solo walks through darkness. He reached out, touching his hand. "And you've shown me why I never should have stopped walking," she said. 2 days later, Internal Affairs called again. This time Knox would be brought in for his own interview. Marcus prepared, reviewing all testimonies, anticipating every excuse. "She tripped. I tried to help. You're overreacting." He crafted precise rebuttals. "Video evidence disproves that. Her statements prove intent. This isn't personal, it's policy." On the morning of Knox's interview, Chief of Police Regina Marshall issued a public memo. "Officer Knox is on paid administrative leave indefinitely, pending investigation. The department takes allegations of misconduct seriously and is committed to fairness and transparency." For the first time, the station buzz felt different. Not protective whispers, but a cautious optimism. That afternoon in the IA office, Knox arrived, his uniform crisp but eyes darting. He sat across from IA's graying lieutenant, the very man Marcus had once looked up to in patrol boot camp. Knox's lawyer hovered in the back, whispering legalese. Knox's face flickered with anger, then shame, then defiance, as he watched Marcus walk in. Greer called his case. "Officer Knox, we have video evidence, logs, and multiple witness statements alleging you forcibly broke Miss Price's cane without justification. How do you respond?" Knox shifted. He cleared his throat. "It was a misunderstanding. I was protecting her from a fall." A collective gasp, not out loud but through the room's tension. Marcus felt his pulse sharpen. "The video," he said, voice steady, "shows you grabbing the cane and applying force until it snapped. The moment after, you walked away without offering help." Knox's lawyer stammered protestations. Officer Knox had reasonable suspicion. He was concerned for her safety, but the evidence was brutal in its clarity. I paired through logs, replayed footage frame by frame, confirmed Derek's timestamps. 2 hours later, Knox exited the building wearing a grim expression. Paid administrative leave, a pending possible criminal charge of assault, and a full departmental review awaited him. It wasn't final judgment, but the badge he'd once waved in others' faces felt suddenly heavy in his pocket. Back at station headquarters, the newsroom crawled across TVs. Officers suspended after cane-smashing incident, blind woman's dignity defended by son and his badge. Social media buzzed with support for Marcus and Vivian. Hashtags like Justice for Vivian trended locally. At home that night, Vivian waited with 2 steaming mugs of tea and a plate of warm biscuits. Marcus's shoulders relaxed when he walked through the door. He dropped the waterproof envelope on the counter. It still held the day's documents, but the burden felt lighter. She poured him tea. "They listened," she said quietly. He nodded, cradling the mug. For now, because he knew this wasn't the end. It was the turning point. The real measure would come when the department issued final findings, when Knox faced internal discipline or criminal charges, when training policies changed. But in that moment, as rain drummed softly on the roof, mother and son sat together, 2 generations bound by courage, by integrity, and by the knowledge that sometimes justice demands every ounce of your resolve, and that in Cedar Falls they would not be silenced. And as the steam curled upward, Marcus Carter silently vowed he would keep walking this path, cane or badge in hand, until dignity was not just restored for his mother, but guaranteed for everyone who called this town home. By late afternoon, when Pinebrook's Internal Affairs Office finally filed Officer Knox's suspension, Darren Price felt neither relief nor victory, only the weight of knowing he'd truly crossed a line that few officers ever dared to approach. Hallways at the Pinebrook Police Department hummed with an uneasy silence. Once friendly nods evaporated, replaced by stares that cut deeper than any open criticism. He stopped by the dispatch clerk's desk, Officer Ruiz, who used to joke with him about Saturday patrols, and found her avoiding his gaze. "Captain Price," she murmured, barely above a whisper, "they're talking." Darren offered a tight, reassuring smile, but she only nodded and looked away. Still, he pressed on. He spent the next hour assembling every piece of evidence he had. The raw cell phone clip from Derek at the coffee cart, Brady Knox's own patrol logs, the sworn affidavits from Clara Young and her daughter, and James Henderson's statement. "I saw it all," the vendor had said. "I recorded it." Darren printed each document, slipped them into a crisp manila folder, and delivered it personally to investigator Mindy Greer in Internal Affairs. She accepted the dossier with a terse thanks, her eyes unreadable. But Darren knew that handing over the case file was only step 1. By evening, the backlash had begun in earnest. His unmarked cruiser, parked out front, greeted him with 4 slashed tires, the rims gouged by a blade sharp enough to carve "traitor" in its wake. No note, no phone call, just the implicit threat: stay silent or pay the price. Inside the station, someone had rigged his locker so the lock jammed. When he finally forced it open, a stack of used coffee cups and crumpled paperwork tumbled out like a cheap taunt. At home, his mother, Eleanor Price, placed the broken halves of her ivory-handled cane on the kitchen table, laid carefully on a clean towel as though they were delicate glass. "They're not stopping, are they?" she asked, voice calm but lined with worry. Darren ran a hand through his hair, exhaustion pulling at his shoulders. "No, but neither am I." He poured them each chamomile tea, the steam curling up like a small white flag of defiance. The next morning, Greer called Darren back in. He arrived at Internal Affairs in a charcoal suit, no uniform today, badge clipped inside his breast pocket. The interrogation room was deceptively small, beige walls, a single fluorescent bulb overhead, a narrow table scarred with years of paperwork battles. Investigator Greer sat at one end, flanked by Lieutenant Sam Vasquez from IA and Sergeant Terry Nguyen, arms folded, eyebrows sharp. "Lieutenant Price," Greer began, voice crisp. "Thank you for coming in again. We're proceeding with a formal inquiry into your complaint against Officer Knox." She slid the manila folder across the table. "We'll start with your recounting of events." Darren nodded, opening his folder. "On the morning of October 12th at approximately 8:15 a.m., Officer Bradley Knox approached my mother, Eleanor Price, in Rosewood Park. Despite her visibility impairment, she posed no threat. Body cam footage shows him seizing her cane and applying force until it snapped. He then walked away without offering assistance. He tapped the grainy cell phone clip on his phone. No audio, just the crack as ivory fractured. Greer leaned forward, her pen hovering. "And you submitted witness statements from Henderson Young and Mrs. Price herself?" "Yes, ma'am. Henderson's video confirms the timestamp at 8:17, 2 minutes after Knox first engaged her. Clara Young's affidavit corroborates that she was within 20 feet, overhearing Knox's condescending remark." Vasquez flipped through the patrol logs. "Officer Knox's route places him in that area from 8:10 to 8:20, confirmed." Sergeant Nguyen spoke for the first time. "So, this wasn't a matter of mistaken identity or a genuine welfare check?" Darren held Nguyen's gaze steadily. "No. The pattern is clear. Knox's presence in the park was routine that morning, but his approach to my mother repeated the same tone of suspicion we saw the previous day. There is no policy that justifies using force against a blind civilian who hasn't threatened anyone." Greer sat back, silent for a moment. Then, "Understood. We'll proceed with witness interviews, additional body cam review, and an administrative hearing. You should expect to be called again next week." As Darren left IA, the tension in his chest eased just slightly. He'd laid out the facts. Now it was their turn to do their job. Back at the precinct, word of the formal inquiry spread faster than wildfire. By noon, Chief of Police Regina Marshall issued a cautious press release. "Officer Bradley Knox has been placed on paid administrative leave pending a full internal investigation. The department remains committed to transparency and accountability." On the TV in the roll call room, local news anchors dissected every frame of the video. Hashtags like "Justice for Eleanor" trended across social media. But inside the station, the atmosphere grew frigid. Marcus noticed that traffic stop requests were rerouted away from him. Patrol subpoenas he filed went unanswered for days. His email inbox overflowed with gentle reminders about departmental loyalty and unwritten rules that discourage internal complaints. One message, anonymous but typed in block caps, warned, "Sit down or get smashed next." He forwarded that to Internal Affairs immediately. That evening, Eleanor listened as Darren walked through every new intimidation tactic: tire slashes, vandalized locker, veiled threats. She poured him tea again. "You've weathered worse storms, Mark," she said, using her childhood nickname for him. "This is just another hallway tactic." He nodded, grateful for her steadfast belief. "I know. But every lie I chase, every witness I protect, it chips away at the power that shields people like Knox. I'll do this as long as it takes." 3 days later, Knox himself arrived at IA for his turn behind the interrogation table. Marcus wasn't present, but he waited outside, pacing the linoleum hallway. When Knox emerged, uniform slightly rumpled, eyes narrowed, he passed within feet of Marcus, their gazes locked. Knox's eyes flicked briefly to the badge in Marcus's suit lapel, then away. The silence between them crackled louder than any accusation. By week's end, IA delivered its preliminary findings. Knox's conduct failed to meet department standards, warranting extended suspension without pay and referral to the district attorney for possible assault charges. The term criminal investigation hung in the air like a guillotine over Knox's career. At roll call on Monday, Chief Marshall addressed the assembled officers without mentioning names. "Let this be a reminder. Our badge is not a license to abuse power. Any violation of trust is met with full scrutiny." The room was still. Never in Marshall's 15 years had her words carried such weight. Slowly, officers exchanged glances. A few offered Darren tentative nods of respect as he passed by. That afternoon, Marcus visited Rosewood Park one more time, this time in plain clothes, accompanied by Investigator Greer, who was mapping out witness interviews. They found Eleanor seated on her favorite bench, new cane in hand, its varnished wood gleaming bright. Children on the swings waved, joggers offered polite good mornings. Greer knelt beside her. "Mrs. Price, thank you for coming in yesterday. Your courage helps change how we protect our citizens." Eleanor reached out, took Greer's hand and squeezed. Later, as spring's first pale flowers crept through the grass, Darren and his mother sat beneath the oak tree. He sipped coffee from Henderson's cart. She cradled her tea. They watched passers-by, families, dog walkers, the occasional police car cruising by, but this time without that oppressive gaze. "It feels different, doesn't it?" Darren said softly. Eleanor nodded, tracing her cane's ivory handle. "It does. But change takes more than a single hearing. It lives in every kindness, every moment people choose to see me, really see me, for who I am." He put an arm around her. "Then we keep walking, together." And as they rose and made their slow journey home, the morning light spilled across their path like a promise that while justice may come wrapped in red tape and bureaucracy, it ultimately belongs to those brave enough to demand it. For a mother, a son, and a town learning at last to stand up for its own. That afternoon, when Lieutenant Tony Williams finally slipped the thick manila envelope across Investigator Sarah Miller's desk, he felt the weight of every step that had led him here. Inside were the hours of cell phone footage from Omar Lewis's coffee cart, the patrol logs proving Officer Danny Hayes was on duty at the precise time he humiliated his mother, Mrs. Carla Williams, the signed affidavit from Nina Brown, and even a handwritten note from the park's concession stand attendant pledging to testify if asked. Miller, Mid-Atlantic Internal Affairs' most meticulous investigator, didn't even glance up. She flipped open the folder, scanned the first page, then lowered her glasses to meet Tony's gaze. "You've done your homework," she said, voice cool but appreciative. "This is more than solid. We'll open a formal inquiry first thing tomorrow." Tony nodded, exhaling slowly. "Thank you. I just want accountability." But accountability, he'd already learned, didn't come quietly. That night when he returned home to Maplewood's sleepy Elm Street, his cruiser lay flat on its rim side. 3 tires slashed so neatly it had taken a moment to realize what he was seeing. A spray-painted message on the driver's door read, "Snitch." No one claimed responsibility, but the stakes were clear. Inside, Carla Williams met him at the door, leaning on her walker for support. Though blind, she sensed the change in the air immediately. "They're not giving up, are they?" she asked. Tony shrugged off his uniform jacket. "No, but neither am I." He guided her to a chair, fetched chamomile tea, and wrapped her hands around the steaming mug. He resisted the urge to tell her how angry he was, anger that flared hotter each time he replayed the snap of her ivory-handled cane. Instead, he focused on her comfort. The next morning, the Maplewood PD's lobby felt different, tenser, more fractured. Whispers followed Tony's path to the IA office. He passed Officer Ruiz at dispatch, who offered a quick, nervous nod. Years of camaraderie couldn't erase the chill now settling between them. He forced himself to keep walking. Inside, Sarah Miller, flanked by Lieutenant Marcus Chen and Captain Elena Ortiz, sat behind a long conference table. The air smelled faintly of dry erase markers and old coffee. Tony sat across from them, documents spread out like trophies. "We've reviewed your submission," Ortiz began, tone measured. "Officer Hayes has been placed on paid administrative leave pending a full investigation. We're also referring this to the county prosecutor for assault charges." Murmurs rippled through the room, some surprised, some wary. Tony simply nodded, though relief flickered in his chest. It wasn't the end. It was only the beginning of the fight to change Maplewood's culture. Back at the precinct, Chief Marshal distributed a terse bulletin. Memorandum to all personnel: abuse of authority will not be tolerated. Officer Daniel Hayes is suspended pending investigation. The words carried more weight than any counseling or retraining. Word spread quickly. By lunchtime, local news outlets were broadcasting the department's commitment to transparency. Yet within the station's walls, resistance took subtler forms. Covert eye rolls in the roll call room, dispatch requests rerouting his calls, paperwork misplaced or delayed. Shoulder taps from fellow officers devolved into cold shoulders. When a routine traffic stop report Tony submitted vanished, he realized the cost of speaking out. At home that evening, Carla Williams watched him sink into the kitchen chair, weariness etched on his face. "They're making it harder, aren't they?" she said softly, her voice carrying maternal pride but also sorrow. Tony rubbed his temples. "Yes, but look what we've started. Officer Hayes sweating under a formal investigation. Taken weeks for that to trickle down." Carla reached across the table, her palm warm against his. "You did right, Tony. Now we make sure it sticks." A week later, they gathered at Rosewood Park for a meeting under the old elm tree. Coach Ramirez from the youth center, Reverend Thompson from St. Mark's Church, Omar Lewis with his mobile cafe cart, even Nina Brown pushing her toddler stroller. No TV cameras, no speeches on risers, just community members who had seen the injustice and refused to look away. Tony stood at the oak bench, new cane in his mother's lap, an elegant mahogany replacement, its handle engraved "Strength." Carla tapped it gently against the wood. "I asked you all here," Tony began, "because this fight isn't just about my mother or one bad cop. It's about making Maplewood safe for everyone, especially those who feel unseen. Starting next month, we'll launch the Carla Williams Initiative, voluntary bias awareness workshops led by community partners, open to every officer. This bench, this park, everyone deserves to walk here in peace." The group broke into quiet applause. Omar slid a fresh cappuccino toward Carla. Nina stood, eyes bright. "I'll bring my church group to help," she said. "We can lead listening circles." Reverend Thompson nodded in agreement, and Coach Ramirez offered to host training sessions at the rec center. Together they sketched a plan: curriculum, schedules, community outreach. As spring sunshine filtered through budding leaves, Maplewood began to change, slowly, quietly. Officer Ruiz attended her first workshop, listening as Carla spoke on the power of presence and dignity. Children at the park waved at Carla and Tony as they walked past. Joggers no longer flinched when Tony drove by in his unmarked cruiser. Officer Hayes remained on leave, his badge sitting in a locker at IA, pending final determination. Rumors circulated that he was seeking reassignment out of state, proof that accountability, once set in motion, can't be easily derailed. One afternoon, as Carla and Tony sat beneath the elm, he pulled out his phone. A new message had arrived. An anonymous video clip of Hayes himself undergoing a mandatory re-education session, face solemn as he listened to testimony from Carla and other visually impaired citizens. No jubilation, just the conviction that justice can be relearned. Carla leaned her head on Tony's shoulder. "We did it," she whispered. "Not as victory, but as a promise renewed." "It's only the start," Tony replied. But for a moment, as the breeze rustled the oak leaves overhead and the scent of Omar's coffee drifted on the wind, Maplewood felt a little lighter. Proof that when the right person decides to push back, an entire town can begin to shift. That afternoon, beneath the old elm tree, as community members gathered, not with banners but with open hearts, Carla and Tony showed us that real change begins in the quiet moments, when someone refuses to look away. Their story reminds us that dignity isn't granted by badges or titles, it's defended by ordinary people who choose courage over comfort. When oppression hides in plain sight, speaking up, even when it feels lonely, can ripple outward, turning bystanders into allies. We learn that accountability isn't just a punishment for the few, but a promise to protect the many. So take this with you. Your presence matters, your voice matters, and sometimes a single act of resistance, like replacing a broken cane or sharing a video, can shift an entire town's conscience. If this video moved you, drop a 1 in the comments. If it fell short of your expectations, hit 0 and let me know how I can make our next story even more compelling.